Good morning, everyone. I'm going to break slightly with tradition here and speak from the heart, so no slides from me this morning. Thank you for the introduction. Yes, I'm Andrew Lever. I'm Director of Innovation at Carbon Trust. And I'd like to take maybe a Scottish lens, if you like, across some of the unique characteristics and opportunities that lie within that as we look towards a future energy system and how that might actually play out for Scotland. Very briefly, in case you haven't heard of the Carbon Trust, we're a mission-driven organisation to move towards a sustainable low-carbon future. For the past 14 years, we've been driving green jobs, investment, accelerating technologies, stimulating private sector investment to help with that mission and drive towards that future. Some examples of our work, of course, the Offshore Wind Accelerator. It's the largest collaborative R&D programme in the world, focusing on offshore wind, of course. It's supported by the Scottish Government, by DEC, and 9 of the developers who hold over 75% of the licensed capacity in the UK. We also design and deliver major energy efficiency programmes, and we've done that in the UK, South Africa, Mexico, and Malaysia. Our Low Carbon Workplace initiative, which is a new one, delivers high-quality refurbished office and low-carbon buildings to occupiers who are both motivated and empowered to ensure that the energy and carbon savings can be achieved. And this is particularly attractive for landlords as well because they effectively future-proofing a portfolio. This fund's now approaching £200 million. And more recently, of course, we've been supporting Wave Energy Scotland here to build out a new approach and a development, stepwise approach to wave energy, which is, again, one of Scotland's key resources and opportunities. We have offices, of course, in Edinburgh, in the UK, London, Cardiff, and Belfast. And further afield in Mexico, Beijing, Johannesburg, and a presence in Washington. So it's a growing global footprint. But back to Scotland. And as you are aware, of course, this country has quite ambitious targets to meet 30% of its overall demand from renewables by 2020. And within that target, 100% towards electricity demand. Now, such a level of ambition, of course, has got to be applauded. However, as we've heard already, with increasing intermittency and the fact that actually electricity demand is only 20% of the total demand, the remaining being, of course, heat and transport, then this raises certain challenges, but obviously opportunities for innovation. So where I'd like to take this is maybe by looking at a couple of international experiences and maybe case studies. Last year, Ireland generated about 19% of its electricity from wind and experienced quite a bit of curtailment, which is effectively, as you know, when supply exceeds demand and therefore generation capacity has to be switched off. By contrast, Denmark generated 40% of its electricity from wind alone, which is actually a new world record, and regularly exceeds on a daily basis over 100% of meeting its demand from wind generation with no curtailment. And so there's obviously two key differences here. Firstly, Denmark is much more interconnected with its European neighbours than Ireland. But secondly, and this is something that Denmark starts to move into, is its electricity and heat supplies are actually becoming more connected. With one of the largest district heating and CHP portfolios in Europe, it's able to transfer sometimes renewable energy across energy vectors from electricity into heat. So what insights can we take from these two examples and apply them into Scotland? Well, we heard yesterday of the Isles project, of course, which is in part looking to increase the interconnection between Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, and what offers one solution towards that interconnectedness. But actually, the interesting one alongside this is this notion of transferring electricity across heat and into transport. And when you consider that Scotland, as I said before, 80% of that energy is towards heat and power. And with such an abundant source of renewable resource, then we should be looking at these kinds of innovations and seeing where the opportunities arise. So when we talk about innovation, it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, and I'd like to try and categorize them into three parts. Business model innovation, technology innovation, and social innovation, which is effectively you and I. So starting with business model innovation, and I'd like to start with what we mean by that is actually changing the electricity market model in Scotland to deploy, to incentivize the deployment of that technology that allows these integration across energy vectors. And a key example is combined heat and power, which is a relatively well-proven and understood technology, but has been rendered kind of uneconomic since the last market change, which I think was back at the start of this century, with the introduction of NITA, which rendered the fact that CHP couldn't quite balance supply and demand, and therefore made it uneconomic. We think this needs to change. Not only is CHP very efficient, it makes the best use of fossil fuels, but its output can be made flexible to manage variable wind and perhaps even solar generation. So on windy and sunny days, CHP can be used to generate and potentially store heat, whilst it can also increase its electricity output, of course, when renewable resources are low. As I mentioned, it's a mature technology. It's ubiquitous across Europe. So really, I guess what we're saying here is that this is a regulatory change and an innovation that needs to happen. And another example of these, and it's been touched on this morning, of course, is energy storage, and I'll come on to that in a second. But again, it should be an asset that is should be recognised in this market mechanism. It's different to centralised power generation, of course, but nevertheless, it's going to be an increasingly valuable part of this future solution. So moving on to kind of technology innovation, we've kind of focused here on 4 areas: offshore renewables, energy storage, transportation, and energy efficiency. Now, innovation that is focused on early stage development in offshore renewables, and where we'd like to focus on that is, of course, wave and floating wind, which Scotland has abundant natural resources to exploit. The Scottish Government should be absolutely applauded for creating Wave Energy Scotland. It's exactly the right kind of thing that needs to happen to keep the country at the forefront of what is a global, one of the largest untapped resources and globally across the world. Floating wind has the potential to game change, certainly, the deployment of offshore wind in Scotland. And we see high levels of ambition in Japan and also the US to commercialise this technology. Now, whilst it's quite relatively new, the analysis that we've carried out actually has the potential for very low and competitive levelized cost of energies, and that's very encouraging. With the heritage, and this is something which we hear a lot of, but the heritage in large-scale offshore engineering through the oil and gas sector, combining this with the UK's leading kind of offshore renewable deployment, we need a long-term political support which will allow Scotland to take a leading role. So there's a few things that could come together that would make that very successful. Now, we talked about intermittency already and energy storage. It feels like a bit of a no-brainer when we listen to some of the projections of renewable generation going forward. You've probably heard Elon Musk with the domestic scale battery storage solution, which has been rolled out, I guess, primarily with their solar PV installations. We've done some work on this in the UK, and actually, from a Scotland perspective, the opportunity perhaps lies more in bulk storage solutions. Intuitively, probably because there's large, more distributed and large-scale renewable generation, and maybe over 50% of that, from a UK perspective, could be positioned towards Scotland. Just a few words on transportation. Scotland has a relatively high population density. If you look across the UK, there's quite a concentration here, of course, and in the central belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh, and its surrounding areas. And that's further underlined when you look at some simple stats around the number of miles that people travel on the motorway. It's some 5,000 in Scotland, whilst in the rest of England it's over 8,000. So, you know, low journeys, low distance journeys does seem to make some sense when we're looking at electrification of transportation, for example. And that's not to say that we should go and innovate within the vehicles themselves, but actually use the assets for vehicle to grid and the additional storage that might be available to join into a more integrated energy system. Now, I've left energy efficiency last, but by no means least, it's perhaps the most important area for innovation. With over a quarter of Scottish homes in fuel poverty, it's also one of the kind of greatest challenges that at least the government has at the moment. With the Smith Commission and the Scottish Government's increased responsibility in implementing the energy company obligation in Scotland, so there's a real opportunity to make a step change. In many respects, we should just be getting on with this, and as many of the solutions and insulation solutions are there. But I'd like to kind of focus, as this is about innovation, on some other areas. And one of the areas that we haven't touched on too much this morning is around, you know, software services and big data. And the rollout of smart meters represents quite a significant opportunity to offer both customers and suppliers greater in understanding of their own energy consumption. So with smart meters, a smart meter is a smart meter. It's not too complicated. It's actually the values in what you generate from that smart meter, the data and the interpretation of that data that yields most value. Another low-cost innovation and quick one perhaps is the management of heat supply in domestic and commercial buildings. We've seen smart thermostats, and I believe there's much more innovation could be done within this area at low cost to bring these solutions to market. And so that is an interesting segue into what we've left at the end called kind of social innovation, which effectively is how you and I should be changing our behaviour as we move into this potential new energy system. In Scandinavia and Sweden, where they've had smart meters for a number of years, very transparent time of use tariffs have allowed customers complete transparency over, you know, how much their energy is costing and at what time of the day. Even today in the UK, in the mobile telephony market, the pay-as-you-go tariff is actually a choice for quite a few of us to appropriately budget. And to use another analogy, you know, in the mid-1990s, coal was mined and delivered locally to the point of use, a kind of decentralized energy system. And individuals were able to see how much coal was in their bunker. It's a visual representation of the energy that they have. It's a form of energy storage as well. And people are able to budget and plan accordingly from week to week. Of course, with the advent of electricity and gas, this tangible, visible linkage has actually disappeared. Therefore, the innovation requirement is perhaps used to bring back that visualization and that tangibility into energy consumption. Social science techniques, neighborhood comparisons, other techniques to nudge people into thinking about how they are consuming energy. A few words on community energy. We've heard a few bits and some good progress made within Scotland on bringing together communities to invest in renewable energy. We're also seeing to see some innovation models coming from the US, which are creating, if you like, virtual communities where people who don't have access to the solar PV, in this case to roofs that are at the right angle to the sun, are able to virtually invest in those and have a virtual net meter to see the benefits. So there are starting to be some innovative, almost business models that allow the community to be broadened and for people to engage in that. So to conclude, really, I mean, I think Scotland has some unique characteristics around its abundant renewables resources and some physical characteristics that will lead to some quite exciting innovation opportunities. They require, we believe, both business innovation, technology innovation, and social innovation to realise them. We can see some lessons learned and some clues there from some European countries. But what's clear is that we need that strategy to transform Scotland into what should be an integrated, flexible, low-cost and low-carbon energy future. Thank you.